Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Bridging of Worlds podcast. I am your host, Ioannis Kokkinos. Thank you so much for joining me. If you're on YouTube watching, thank you for tuning in. And if you're on one of the podcast platforms, thank you for tuning in as well. So today I have quite an episode for you. I mean, that's how I have it in my mind with what it is I want to bring through. I did mention last week that I will be talking about body, soul, spirit, and higher mind, higher consciousness in this episode. I'm also going to bring in sexual energy because we're still talking about psychosomatic practices as far as working with this specific energy, which is our creative energy. And we're going to talk a little bit about Platonic school of thought. So body is Soma, soul is Psyche or Psyche, spirit is Pneuma, and higher mind or higher consciousness is Nous. So you will be hearing these words throughout the episode. I also want to bring in Eros to the conversation. Eros is quite packed as a concept. It is a thread of love according to the ancient Greeks. So in ancient Greece, there were several aspects of love. Agape is the universal divine love. And Eros was one of these threads, is one of these threads of love, which speaks to the physical act of love. In modern day society, it has become a little bit distorted. We tend to hear Eros and we think of erotica and lust and sex toy stores, which have their place, right? But Eros goes much more deep than just lust and, that superficial need to get instant gratification through a sexual means. So that's why I think today is going to be loaded. I think it's going to be packed. So it is up there in the ether. Now my job is to bring it down into the physical through words. So bear with me. So I do want to bounce from the previous episode. I want to elaborate on why sexual energy can be a modality for healing. I talked about orgasmic energy, which is basically sexual energy, because sexual energy is vibrational energy. Everything is vibration. Everything is creation. Vibration is creation. And why I want to bring in these 4 pillars of manifestation, as I'd like to call them, is because it is through the physical that we need to begin in order to start our spiritual ascension, in order to start our spiritual journey. So body is Soma. Soma is the first pillar. Soma is the foundation. We have to work with the body. Now, this is nothing new as far as what I haven't said already in the previous episodes, that really we go into our body to begin our healing because our emotions reside within our body and we need to go to the emotion. We need to go to the feeling of anything in order to begin healing. And this is also a catalyst for the spiritual journey, for the spiritual ascension. Now, the next pillar is psyche or psyche or soul. There are a lot of theories, doctrines, religious teachings, spiritual channeled messages that the soul reincarnates. The soul incarnates from one life to the next when it feels ready to come back to earth in order to learn specific lessons, in order to have specific experiences. I highly recommend reading Many Lives, Many Masters. This book was game-changing for me. It is a fantastic book. I'll put the link below if you're on YouTube. It is by Brian L. Weiss. I think I pronounced that correctly, who's a psychiatrist that basically goes in depth with sessions that he has with a client where he performs past life regression therapy, and he doesn't even know, right? Like in the beginning, he has no idea that that's what's happening. I won't get into specifics, but fascinating book if you want to learn more about, the soul's purpose and reincarnation from a more modern day, relatable, psychoanalytical perspective. So the soul needs a body to do its thing. Psyche needs the body. Now, we do say psyche in English. In psychology, it is a term. I do believe it is more linked to the mind. When we say like the psyche, we think mind. That's not exactly the case. Both are pillars in the four pillars, right? Mind, higher mind, and soul. But basically, the soul is art and the body is the canvas. So if we think of a painter painting a beautiful painting, we need that solid surface, which is the canvas, which is the body, and the colors, the shapes. I don't know like the artistic terms here, but basically you catch my drift that whatever's going on as far as painting wise is concerned, and the use of colors and the different strokes and the different shades and the different hues, that's the soul. But we don't stop at the soul. And here I want to bring in Eros into the conversation because we have the Greek myth of Eros and Psyche, Eros and soul. So already the ancient Greeks figured out that Eros, aka physical sex, is not limited just to the body. Eros is an expression of the soul because Eros is creation. Now, there are many definitions of Eros. There's a Jungian definition of it. There's a Freudian definition of it. There's the ancient Greek god, Eros. There's the Roman equivalent, which translated to Cupid, which has its own energy, has its own vibration. But for the sake of today's episode, I'm talking about Eros, who is the male counterpart of love in this specific myth. And Psyche, soul, is the feminine counterpart. Now, the etymological meaning of psyche, comes from three different Greek words. Physi, which means nature, orchi, and echi. That means to direct, to drive, and to basically hold, to contain. So when we say nature, obviously our minds go to the physical nature of our world. Everything is communing through Eros. Everything is basically making love to each other because life is in a constant state of creation. And in the myth of Eros and Psyche coming together, they have a child called Idoni. That translates to pleasure. So soul, Eros, pleasure are all interconnected, and all of these aspects of our human condition don't only get to be experienced by the body, but also by the soul. Now, we cannot have soul without spirit. Spirit and soul are two sides of the same coin. So spirit is the third pillar. Spirit is basically the fuel that infuses all of life. So if soul is like the paint and the art on top of the canvas, spirit is what makes it happen. Right? When I said in the previous episode, to be inspired is to be in spirit, that is exactly what spirit does. It inspires us into action. It inspires us into creativity. So basically, it inspires all the world to do exactly what it is doing. The soul of the world is inspired by the spirit of the world, of the universe, of the cosmos. And of course, this always comes back to our human experience. Because we are the microcosm that reflects the macrocosm, we can apply these expressions of life to our own expression. So remember when I said that spirit is pneuma, which comes from pnoi, which comes from breath in Greek. When we give breath to something, we give something life. So that's what spirit does. It is distinct from soul because soul has like more personality. Soul has character. Soul is more specific, if you will, right? Like when we are painting, we're using specific set of colors, specific set of shades, specific set of tools, right? Soul is more specific. Soul has more personality. Spirit is what gives that life. When a painter is inspired to paint, that's coming from spirit. And basically, the painter is expressing their soul on the canvas, which is body. We can apply all of that onto our own human condition when we are healing. And this ties in with using sexual energy as a modality of healing and using orgasmic energy as a modality of healing. Because as the saying goes, as within, so without. As without, so within. Whatever is going on in the cosmos, whatever is going on in the universe, is also going on with us. Now, these three pillars are more relatable, let's say, kind of like more easily to experience as part of the human condition because we do need to spiritually awaken. And that's where Nous comes in. That's the higher mind. So in the Eastern teachings, in the yogic teachings, in the tantric teachings, in the Buddhist teachings, we talk of the higher mind. So remember when I talked about the third eye, the crown chakras, right? Like this is where we activate the higher mind. The third eye is to see in the invisible realms, archetypes, deities, ancestors, saints, so on and so forth. And then the crown is knowing what is going on, understanding the messages that we're receiving, understanding the truth that we are receiving. So the ancient Greek equivalent to this is Nous, which is divine intellect. And in Platonic school of thought, Nous is located at the top of the head. Nous, higher mind, the witness. So I talked about the witness in previous episodes. We need to hold space without judgment. The witness in itself is awareness. The witness is not passive. The witness is not a breathing corpse. The witness is incredibly present, and the witness in itself is awareness. It's the awareness, it's the intelligence, it's the consciousness of creation. And that is Nous. We all have that. But we need to awaken into Nous. So, as I said, the body is the expression of the soul is the expression of the spirit, and the spirit is the expression of Nous, higher mind. Because before physical creation, before everything came into being, there was only consciousness. There was only divine information. So this is why I like to call it the 4 pillars of manifestation. Body is foundation, then the soul incarnates into the body. The spirit infuses the soul with doing what it needs to do, and that all comes from divine intelligence, divine intellect, Nous. So when we spiritually awaken, obviously we need to start with our body. When we go into our body and we have our emotional experiences, when we process emotions, but we also start learning how to witness those emotions, this is how we start activating our higher mind, our Nous. And here we experience ego death. Now, ego death can be translated to Thanatos. This is the Greek word for death. Thanatos is the counterpart to Eros. Thanatos is destruction. Eros is creation. So when we are actually being erotic, when we are being intimate with one another, when we are making love, making Eros with our partner, we experience ego death because we need to surrender to this life force. We need to let go when we are experiencing this energy moving through us. It is primal as it is divine. The universe is primal. Creation is primal. The entirety of all of existence is primal, but it's also sacred. So when we are working with sexual energy, when we are using this energy to move emotions, feelings, and thoughts from within us, as not just the creative aspect of life, but the destructive aspect of life. And when I say destructive, I don't mean just self-destruction for the sake of, degrading and decaying ourselves. I mean it in the ego death sense. Because this energy was here before us. And we are to surrender to this energy as we are to will with this energy, as we are to use this energy. So we can do this in a solo practice. If we want to self-pleasure, right? Pleasure idoni, that is the child of Eros and Psyche, Eros and soul. We are communing with our soul at this point through the body, because the soul needs the body. The soul incarnates into a body. But we don't want to stay just at the level of the soul. We want to use pleasure, we want to use sensation, we want to use consciousness to access spirit and nous. We need to learn how to start holding space for absolutely everything in our day-to-day, in our lives. We definitely need to learn how to hold space for each other, right? When we need support, when we need to give support, when we need to receive support, we need to remove judgment. We need to offer a safe space for our loved ones and vice versa. But if we're using sexual energy as a modality of healing within our bodies, and we can do this with a partner or solo, we definitely need to learn how to offer that space towards each other and even ourselves. Because probably we've grown up with generational shaming, generational wounding, and generational trauma around sex, sexual energy, self-pleasuring, masturbating, right? All of these uncomfortable topics to talk about, but that's what this podcast is here for. So do you see how basically we cannot reach spirit and nous without body and soul? There are a lot of teachings, there are a lot of doctrines that say we need to move away from matter. Now, matter just speaks to the body. There are teachings that do talk about the differences between body, soul, and spirit. The way I understand it, the way that I've, kind of processed everything as far as my own healing journey is concerned, that we need to start with the body. Yes, we need to experience our soul. We need to express our soul, but we need to know where all of that comes from. And that comes from the divine, that comes from the sacred, that comes from spirit and from nous. And just to add a little bit more poetry, because why not? Body and soul, Soma and Psyche, are feminine. Pneuma and Nous, spirit and higher mind, are masculine. So they are polarities on the same axis. As part of the human condition, we cannot have body without higher mind, and vice versa. And we cannot have soul without spirit, and vice versa. Now, obviously, when we are not in body, when we leave our body and we are back to being a soul, that soul is still made of spirit. And that spirit is to return back to the one true home, which is higher mind, the higher mind of the universe, higher divine cosmic intelligence. So we don't need a body really to get there. But because we're human and we're here, and the soul purposely incarnates into a body, so we need the body as part of the human experience to fully embody our spiritual self. Because if this wasn't important, if having a body was not important, if the realm or world or plane of matter was not important, the soul would not incarnate. The soul would bounce from one star system to the next, from one galaxy to the next, and have the time of its life. We are here to experience our humanity in all its totality, in all its richness, and that begins with our body. And I'm going to say this too. it begins with our sexual energy, because sexual energy is creative energy is spiritual energy, and vice versa. I will never stop saying that. And just a little bit more to elaborate on Eros and Thanatos. So when we are being erotic, when we are accessing that life force, that energy within ourselves, we are also accessing Thanatos, because they are two sides of the same coin. And to access Eros as we access Thanatos is to harness this energy as a means to experience ego death. And this is healing. This is spiritual liberation. A sexual awakening is also known as a spiritual awakening, because this energy, this life force, is from the spiritual. It's powerful stuff. It is potent stuff. It is deep stuff. But it really all comes down to starting to hold space for it, because this is how we start to access Nous. And spirit is the expression of Nous. Soul is the expression of spirit. Body is the expression of soul. Soma, Psyche, Pneuma, Nous. As I said in the previous episode, orgasmic energy, which is synonymous with sexual energy, is the energy that is infused into absolutely everything. All of life is infused with orgasmic energy. That doesn't mean everything is climaxing all the time, but it does mean that everything is vibrating. Atoms vibrate. The table that my microphone is currently standing on, the atoms within that table are currently vibrating. The atoms within my body right now are currently vibrating. The floor beneath me is currently vibrating. It doesn't mean we can constantly feel the vibration, but it is happening. This physics tells us this. So when we apply this to basically all of creation, and we see that creation is life, birth, as it is death and destruction, that is Eros and Thanatos. And those two aspects are infused within our own sexual, creative, erotic energy. So you can imagine how interesting things can get going through this practice with this awareness. Okay? So I think that is enough food for thought today. If you are enjoying this podcast, please show me some love on YouTube by liking and subscribing. Share the content as well if you feel like somebody else would benefit from this information. If you're on one of the hosting platforms, show some love as well and share this episode with whoever you think would benefit from this information as well. So my socials have expanded. You can find me on Instagram with my full name. You can find me on Threads with my full name. You can find me on TikTok with my full name, and you can find me on Facebook under Bridger of Worlds. Okay, so I do look forward to connecting with you in any way. If you have some questions for me, if you want to elaborate on anything yourself, please go ahead and leave a comment on YouTube or social media. I so greatly appreciate that. I will be back next week, of course, with another episode. And as always, please remember that you are the medicine and I am just the messenger. Thank you very much.